Order the Public Works Committee meeting dated Thursday, November 29, 2018 to order. Roll call, please, Kathy.
Yes, sir. Mr. Abshire?
Here.
Mr. Angelpont? Excuse me, Mr. Barrett?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farner?
Here.
Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Guillory?
Here.
Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Ms. Mayo? Here. Vice Chairman McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmie was unable to attend this evening. Mr. White?
Here.
And Chairman Bray.
Here.
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, with that, we'll go to item 3, receive report from planning staff regarding proposed revisions to chapter 26 of the Code of Ordinances, Zoning and Development. Ms. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I have a brief PowerPoint. I promise to keep it under 20 minutes. I know the Saints are playing.
2 minutes?
But I do have this PowerPoint for you guys, but I know sometimes it's hard to read, so I did also put it on your tablets as an attachment to the item if you'd rather just follow along on your tablets. But I'll just run through this very quickly. This is an amendment that we've been working on for a number of months. We've been talking about it for ages, so I'm glad to be here tonight to present it to all of you. I'd like to go through just a general description of the changes. I'd like to go over some specific new concepts, tell you what we've done so far in the process and what's going to happen next. So it is mostly, and this is it right here, it's about 50 or so pages, but most of it is just these general amendments. I call it cross-referencing with existing codes, eliminating conflicts, modifying wording to reflect ordinance changes, and things like that. We do have these 4 new concepts. The proposed new concepts, it's a reception facility, secondary dwelling units, driveway access regulations, and expanding the administrative review process. On the reception facility, this is where we're really just trying to be proactive. We've had a couple calls recently due to the trend in weddings and other special events being held in rural barn-type settings. We've had calls inquiring if people could buy agricultural property to develop special event centers. It's not addressed in our ordinance, so what we're proposing is adding a definition for a reception facility, allowing it by right in C2 and higher zoning, which is where a restaurant with alcohol consumption or a lounge would be allowed, and also allowed by exception in agricultural zoning, which would at least allow the public and the neighbors the right to come and speak on the potential use in their neighborhood. Secondary dwelling unit is something that many of you have probably heard about for a long time, probably 10 plus years. I think we've been talking about doing a mother-in-law cottage kind of situation. And what our intent here is really to address the changes in our population. We know that our older people are living longer and they're being more active. A lot of people are more spry than they used to be. So we don't want to automatically put our older population in assisted living facilities. Many people would just like to have them close by. So this would hopefully address that situation, as well as adult children that might move back home after they graduate from college and they need to pay off maybe some student loan debt. So what we're proposing is this secondary dwelling unit. It would not be a second unit. It would not be like 2 trailers on one lot. It's intended to be a secondary unit and to look as such from the road to the primary structure. It would be allowed by right in A1 agricultural zoning, single-family residential, and mixed residential. It would have to meet certain parameters that have to do with the setbacks, the size. It would have to be smaller than that primary unit, and it would also have to be built behind the front building line of the primary dwelling to make it look like it's an accessory. We also want the unit to be constructed on site. We don't want to create a situation where someone moves a storage building that they've purchased at a home improvement facility and then they try to convert it. We want it to be built on site and really try to match the dwelling. Driveway access is potentially the most complicated. matter in the proposal, and we have met with the Alliance for Positive Growth, and they provided us with some really good feedback, and we tweaked this section as a result of the comments. But basically, what we're attempting to do here, in one sense, is to expedite requests and to make it easier for developers to move forward without having to come to the Planning and Zoning Board. And they would do this by providing us with engineering justification, like a DOTD study that would justify where they wouldn't meet our minimum or maximum turning radius. Things like that that typically go before the Planning and Zoning Board and get approved, but the developers had to wait 6 weeks to get that approval. So hopefully we can expedite those types of requests. Now, we're also calling for greater road frontage requirements for new subdivisions that would be on a high-speed road. So for the folks in South Lake Charles along Elliott Road and Ham Reed, I think you've probably noticed that there's a bunch of driveways that back out on the Ham Reed, and in the Carlos area, there's a manufactured home subdivision on Carlos Drive. So those create a lot of safety hazards for us, and it's been important for our department and the engineering department to really try to make those types of developments safer. So what we're proposing here is that lots along those high-speed roads would have to have greater road frontage than what's regularly allowed. We're also saying here that if you develop a major subdivision, which is more than 10 lots, that you would have to have an interior road, that you couldn't just chop up lots along that collector, that main parish road. So we're really trying to improve safety here. And then we also include some information about minimum distance from corners, and we provide guidelines for shared access where a developer might not be able to meet that new frontage requirement, but they could potentially make the development work if they just had one driveway. And it's just purely for flexibility's sake and at the developer's discretion. It's nothing that's being required. And then we also have a component in here where some smaller approvals could be granted, variances, administratively by the director with input from the parish engineer. So we hope that all of that will expedite. So even though we're asking for greater road frontage requirements, overall, we feel like that this will be very helpful for developers. The administrative review process has been in place for probably about 10 years, but what we're proposing here is that we expand it. This is an expedited process that includes a sign being posted, a legal notice being run in the paper, plus input from all the police jurors in the areas that are affected, along with the director approval. So it shaves probably a couple weeks off of the approval process if you qualify. So what we're proposing is that we expand it to allow varying more than one setback, varying the driveway width, and for certain issues within the urban service area, which is the area that surrounds our larger municipalities, kind of the fringe areas that we've been talking about for a long time. So the two variances that you see typically go before the board. They're quite common, and they pretty much always get approved. So we figure, why make those people go before the board? So those are kind of easy. And within the urban service area, what we're proposing is that if a developer comes and wants to do a new subdivision with smaller lots than the parish ordinance requires, or if they want to do an apartment complex, multifamily development with more units than we allow, if they're within that urban service area, they would be able to go to the administrative review process as long as they meet that city's criteria, knowing that in the future it's likely got the potential to be annexed by that city. So if they would drop below the city regulation, they would have to go before the board. I hope that makes sense. So we have done all of this work under the guidance of the Police Jury's Planning and Zoning Liaison Group. We've probably discussed this with those folks probably 3 or 4 times at least. We introduced it to the Planning and Zoning Board at their October meeting. We posted it on the website for public review. After that meeting, we sent it to the Alliance for Positive Growth in September. So they've had it for a long time. In October, we met with Alliance for Positive Growth. As I said, we made some modifications as a result of their comments. And then we brought it back to the board on November 13th, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval. So we're here tonight to just introduce it to you guys, answer any questions you might have. Hopefully, you guys would vote to adopt it at your December 6th meeting. We're going to keep it on our website. I'm going to go ahead and post this PowerPoint tomorrow. And any members of the public are welcome to look at it and let us know any comments. We're going to accept comments up to adoption. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jennifer. We do have some questions. President Barris.
Thank you, Mr. Brain. First of all, I want to commend you guys for recognizing and listening to our residents and our constituents. You know, one of the biggest things that we hear on the street is, you know, the stringent permitting processes, strict guidelines and such that really could or could not, you know, go away or exist. Anyway, and it shows that you guys are listening, and you know, to what they're saying. We did the whole long-term planning study just a while back, and you know, that was a big thing. That was a big thing that we were hearing, and I know from stakeholders, I know we heard that. So I'm glad. This shows that, bam, we're right on the ball with this, and I appreciate that, and I hope you know, we continue in that direction. Now, on that last step back there, you said it was received a board approval.
Yes.
What board? Who was that? What board?
The
was
Planning
that?
and Zoning Board.
Oh, okay.
We introduced it to them in October at their meeting, similar to what we're doing tonight, and then we went into more detail on November 13th at their meeting,
Okay.
and that's where they voted.
I was just making sure that
Right.
that was the board that we were
Yes.
speaking about. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Cool.
Mr. Latour.
Yes, on the second dwelling, is any of the frontage, the linear foot on the road have to change or increase for the second dwelling?
No. The way it works in our office right now is if you want to do a second dwelling, like if you wanted to have a second trailer on your property, you would have to basically double the road
Correct, that's
frontage
what I was
requirements.
curious, yeah.
Under the secondary dwelling unit, you would not have to meet that. You could just use your existing road frontage as long as you meet the parameters of the size and the location and the setbacks.
Okay. Well, while you're looking into something similar, this happened in my district. There was a lady, she owned a manufactured home, or it was a double wide, and she was probably like, you know, 7/10 of an acre. And when she moved the trailer off, she had to get another, I guess, a permit or another approval to be able to move the home back on. If there was already an existing home, is there any way they could be grandfathered in, wouldn't have to, even though they did a relocation or a new home?
I don't know the specifics of that situation, but under our grandfathering, they would have 6 months. So let's say the property was zoned commercial and there was a manufactured home there, and she moved the manufactured home off. As long as she got the permit and moved it back on within 6 months, it would be allowed. All I can think is that maybe it went past the 6-month grandfathering.
Yeah, she had
I'm not sure.
basically had sold her trailer, bought another one, and she had to come back, and we got it pushed up, pushed through the agenda and everything else, but I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
You know,
we probably need
We
to
can
look
do
at
some
that.
more research on it.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foreman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the second dwelling, I can't help but believe that there's going to be some conflicts set up with R1 residential areas that have subdivision restrictions that don't allow these in there by covenants. Is there a way that we could make the applicant bring in their restrictive covenants, if there are any, to make sure that we don't set up a civil matter between the neighborhood and this particular residence? I can't help but believe that situation's gonna come up. It comes up in a lot of other things.
Yes, you're right.
Now, we don't wanna add to that problem, so.
That's very valid, and we don't enforce subdivision restrictions.
I know
It's
that.
the private covenant.
I know that, but it could be as easy as a checkbox that says that you have, that there's not a stumbling block, that we're not gonna add fuel to the fire.
We do have on one of our checklists a note that says that it's the property owner's responsibility to verify that it's not in conflict with their subdivision restrictions, we can make sure that's there on that specific checklist, or we can say that they've checked it, but
Any step that we can go to, maybe Sam can look into this as far as the legality of whether we can make them prove to us that there's not restrictive covenants that would prohibit that. And there's people that are gonna come in here and say, oh, I didn't know any better. And then it becomes a civil matter between the residents that probably can't afford to sue their neighbor, really don't wanna sue their neighbor. And, but they don't want a second residence in a restricted neighborhood. So if we could look into that one little item, I like the idea of allowing this. I think it's a good thing. The other thing is on the front footage on the lots, adding to that front footage. Is this just for new subdivisions, or is this for single lots that exist out there?
it's just for new subdivisions.
Somebody's got a single lot out there somewhere, we're not gonna add that. You know, the property was purchased with a certain front footage, we're not gonna add to that.
No,
Okay,
just for new
good,
subdivisions.
good. Thank you. Appreciate y'all's work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Scott?
Let's stay with the second dwelling. And who did you say that we're targeting? So we're targeting family members, but what is stopping this from people just now putting rental properties? Nothing? I mean, we're gonna be okay with whoever they want to rent them to or do it? I mean, that's,
It's
I'm
one
just
of
asking a
those
question. I don't
unfortunate
really-
situations where
Yeah, we don't have
you
control.
know how it's intended, and you know that there's people that need this.
so we're gonna get out of the hardship business and just basically say, if you meet all the criteria, you can put a second dwelling in with, okay. And my second thing is I'm glad we're looking into the driveway issues, because I probably get more phone calls on driveways through the planning department. That's a whole lot of different issues, and, you know, I would hope we get a little, the same as the city and the state in looking at these things, and not so much have to do variances. I would like to see a little more cohesion in what we all agree on, so we don't have to go through, well, I'm across the street, so appreciate y'all doing that. When we get into the urbanized, the 6,000 square foot, we're not losing anything when it comes to drainage though, right? I mean, y'all protecting drainage. Is that gonna adjust anything? I gotta worry about loopholes or anything?
No,
Y'all can-
they're still gonna have to meet all that criteria.
As long as they're 2 acres or less, or not? Where does that fall into play? Because sometimes them 2 acre things are key in these. If I do 20 of these little bitty things that you let them pack it in there, and they didn't have to do detention, or they're paying the fee, that's never gonna make up for the drainage. So if we're gonna allow them to cram it into the urbanized area, and I would disagree, they ain't never getting annexed if they build on it. They will annex the piece of property next to them that ain't built, but I would disagree with the annexing into one day. So I just wanna make sure drainage is protected, that's all I wanna say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Scott, Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, if we could go back to the second dwelling slide up there. Jennifer, I'm just having a little bit of red flags right here. I absolutely agree with what Les is saying as far as, you know, single-family residential, and you put a second dwelling, and then the neighbors aren't really wanting that in the neighborhood, and just the covenant is the only thing they've got in there. That gives me a little bit, I like to help out people when there's a parent or a kid moving back in. We gotta look at some way to maybe regulate this, because, and then the second thing, Dennis brought up, if you build it and then all of a sudden they're renting it out to some worker in a residential neighborhood, you're really hurting the integrity of that residential neighborhood. That's not our intent. The second dwelling, I think, was always for hardships, when we had hardships, or for seniors, or for students, or something like this. So I think we need to look harder at that, in my opinion, before we open a can of worms that we do lead to a lot of civil litigation that we really don't want to have that put on people, as well as residential neighborhoods with second dwellings that are renting it out in a neighborhood. I think we'd have a lot of heartburn with people that happened to. You know, whether consent of the neighbors before you do something like this, or checkbox. It's a little stronger than just a yes, no type thing. And those HOVs need to be, I know we don't enforce them, but how do we handle this? Let's put a little of y'all's brain power into this to help us come up with some ideas of how we don't really open a Pandora's box on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. President Barrett.
Well, first of all, let's not have a heart attack speculating. Everybody's sitting there already guessing and putting on, oh, well, it's gonna be a rent house, it's gonna be this. I would like to see maybe a minimum square footage of this addition. And as far as like this regulatory thing, these covenants, they have to take care of themselves. We don't get into, we're not in the business of of enforcing deed restrictions. You're not supposed to have goats and farm animals in your yard, but in a subdivision, but by golly, somebody's gonna go and do it, but we didn't say, hey, man, when you built this house, check this box here that says you're not gonna put any goats on your property. So, they're just gonna have to tend to their deed restrictions, and if a neighbor raises a flag, then a neighbor raises a flag. We're just saying, hey, you can do it. I do like Mr. Scott's suggestion as far as paying attention to drainage, and the square footage, let's keep an eye on that. But, as far as us taking the initiative to regulate this, to keep it from happening, no, the deed restrictions should tend to that. Thank you, sir.
Move to receive report.
Second. Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Landry to receive a report and second by
Chairman
Mr.
Brain,
McMillan.
can
Oh, go
I
ahead,
interrupt
Mr.
before you
Brain.
go vote on that? This is a technicality. There's an oversight, but it may end up being beneficial. The way I think, Jennifer, you have this is that police jury would take action at their meeting next week. Well, this was just one of these things that happens. We don't have that on the agenda for next week, on your agenda committee. We can ask you to add that, if you'd like, on the agenda committee after this meeting's adjourned, to have action on the 6th. But I'm trying to gauge y'all's feeling. If you feel like you need more time, I'm not trying to stretch this out. We could put it on another agenda, but if you don't do anything right now, there's no action on the 6th that you could take. You have to add it to the agenda. I apologize, it was an oversight on the agenda prep.
Well, we could vote on it today? Is that what you're saying?
Well, y'all could recommend tonight, but to be honest, that wasn't the intent for planning. It's too quick.
Yeah.
And y'all clearly have some hanging issues. It's not really a problem. I just don't want to hit y'all with this.
But that's handled by the agenda committee, right?
Yeah, y'all, I think you can do Mr. Landry's motion.
Yeah.
When we get to that, I just kind of need y'all's guidance on how you want to do that.
Go ahead, Mr. McMillan.
I would maybe ask Wes, we'll try to get some of these answers. What kind of timeline would you need with 30 days if we backed it up and deferred it for 30 days, or is this?
I think so. I think we could probably answer the questions that you have, or the concerns, within that time frame.
So January committee, we'll bring it back up.
You good?
Yeah, I'd maybe like to see us, Mr. Chairman, and the jurors maybe back it up for 30 days. So we're just now getting this to digest it, and good presentation tonight, but there are some questions that we need to look at. So,
Second that motion.
I think we can do something on the agenda committee.
Well, but on it, Mr. Brain, if y'all do what Mr. McMillan is suggesting, that would work too. You wouldn't have to do anything on the agenda committee.
Chris, would you change your motion?
I don't need to change my motion. I just received report. We don't need to do anything
Yeah.
because it's not on the agenda. So it's just, nothing's going to happen until when you're satisfied, they'll put it on the agenda.
With your direction tonight, if y'all are okay, we will add an item in the second meeting in January.
All right.
Between now and then, Wes will address these issues, and maybe we'll have another liaison group or something.
Gotcha. Okay, we had a motion by Mr. Landry and a second by Mr. McMillan to receive report. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion carries. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're gonna go to item 4. Consideration of adopting a resolution approving an amendment to the professional engineering contract with C.H. Fenstermaker and Associates.
Move on
LLC
item 4.
Second.
for the Coach Williams Drive Extension Project. Have a motion by Mr. McMillan, a second by President Barris. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 5, consideration of adopting a resolution
Mr.
approving
Chairman.
an active sale
Mr.
agreement. I'm so
On item
sorry.
4, I did have one quick
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Mr. McMillan.
I would go to Tim to ask, what kind of scope change are we looking at here?
We're looking at, the basic engineering fee is gonna be reduced because of the cost of the bid came in lower than what was the estimated
Perfect.
cost. And there
like
were some additional
reducing fees.
services that we included that were needed to complete the design.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Thanks, sir. Okay, item 5, consideration adopting a resolution approving an active sale agreement for the purchase of property.
Move on 5.
For the Carlos Drive Extension Project Phase 2. Motion by President Barris, second by Mr. Collins. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 6, consideration of adopting a resolution
Move on
approving
6.
an
Second.
active sale and acceptance agreement for the intersection improvements of U-Win Road, Gloria Drive at US 171. Have a motion by Mr. Collins and a second by Mr. White. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 7, consideration adopting a resolution approving a temporary construction servitude agreement for the Lincoln Road Bridge Replacement Project. Have a motion by Mr. Latour, second by Ms. Mayo. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 9, consideration of adopting a resolution accepting Calcasieu Parish. Did, okay. Item 8, consideration of adopting a resolution
So moved. Second.
approving active sale agreements for the purchase of property for the Rosno Road Bridge Replacement Project. Have a motion by Mr. Latour and a second by Mr. Guillory. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 9, consideration adopting a resolution accepting Calcasieu Parish Project number 2015-07 as substantially
Second.
complete. Have a motion by Mr. Latour, and a second by Mr. White. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that motion will carry. Item 10 is advised that a donation has been received in the amount of $25,000 for Calcasieu Parish Animal Services and Adoption Center for the succession of Evelyn Hairston Chandler. Okay, and number 11, are there any other matters for consideration? If not, I have a personal point of privilege by Mr. Barris.
Thank you, Chairman Brame, and I sent this to supervision to look at, but I do want to read this, and if you'll indulge me, we don't hear good stuff a lot, and especially about our employees. And I got a text the other day from a gentleman, and it was to our sign department, and I'll just read it if you'll allow me to.
Yes.
About a month ago, Dustin Reeves with your sign department was in our neighborhood doing some work and called me and said 2 of our neighborhood watch signs were missing, and if we decided to replace them, give him a shout. I had a meeting with a few neighbors, and the signs arrived on the 16th. I texted him on the 19th, and this morning at 8 a.m. he called and had said Alex Hallman and Donald Pryor were on the way out to install the new signs. He also advised me he would be using rivets instead of bolts and nuts, making it much harder to remove. Both Alex and Donald arrived shortly afterward, picked up the signs, went over what they were going to do. They were both very informative, very well-mannered, yes and no sirs, etc. Don't hear much of that among younger guys nowadays. Alex called me in about an hour, said they had finished and were headed to another job. He said most public employees would make sure that a job was a full day's work. They did exactly as they told me, and I'm very well pleased. About an hour later, Dustin called to see if everything went as planned. He owns his own personal business, and he says he doesn't get that kind of service from private companies. Just wanted to let us know thanks for all that they do for us. And I sent this to the Public Works Director, all their supervision, and, you know, I know that you guys are gonna take care of it, but I wanted y'all to, you know, to know, and, you know, I in my email to staff, I commended whoever is helping to create such a culture, and I hope that it is shared and spread throughout the organization, and y'all doing something right, so thank y'all.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Mr.
President
Chairman.
Barris, for sharing that with us.
Move to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
I have a motion to adjourn and a second. We are adjourned.